The grand tapestry of galactic civilization stretched across 27,000 star systems, woven together by the threads of advanced technology, bureaucratic tedium, and the universal constant that was paperwork. Even in the vacuum of space, documentation found a way to multiply. The Galactic Classification Authority, whose acronym GCA sounded suspiciously like the noise most species made when choking on something unpleasant, had meticulously categorized every known sentient species according to their threat assessment, evolutionary advantages, and whether they could be invited to diplomatic functions without causing interstellar incidents. Humans occupied a peculiar spot in this cosmic filing system, filed under Deathworlders Class 3, yet somehow subcategorized as mostly harmless with an asterisk. The asterisk referred to a footnote that simply read, "See Appendix Q regarding anomalous behavior patterns and inexplicable survival rates." Appendix Q, naturally, had been misplaced during the last bureaucratic restructuring, which happened to coincide with the GCA's annual holiday party. Cosmic coincidences were just another universal constant. Xenobiologist Zx'r Tox of the Lenticular Scientific Academy stared at the classification report with all four of its eyes, each independently registering different levels of skepticism. As the foremost expert on evolutionary biology from high-gravity worlds, Zx'r had been dispatched to this unremarkable blue-green planet to verify these classification anomalies firsthand. The Academy had called it a prestigious research opportunity. Zx'r called it being volunteered without actually volunteering, which was yet another universal constant. "Environmental adaptation complete. You may now disembark," announced the ship's AI with the cheerfulness of someone who wasn't about to step onto a planet where the gravity alone felt like being hugged by an overly affectionate gas giant. Zx'r's exosuit compensated for Earth's crushing gravity and hostile atmosphere, rich in reactive oxygen, a substance most civilized planets had the good sense to keep safely bound in compounds rather than floating freely in their air. The landing site had been carefully selected, remote enough to avoid mass human contact, yet accessible enough for Zx'r's research purposes. The Northern Cascade mountain range, primitive, raw, and exactly the sort of place that explained why humans had evolved such baffling resilience. Zx'r's preliminary research suggested that humans voluntarily visited such places for recreational purposes, a concept that registered somewhere between inexplicable and completely deranged on the xenobiologist's comprehension scale. 3 standard days into the observation mission, Zx'r's equipment detected an approaching human biosignature. The xenobiologist quickly activated its camouflage field, which rendered it nearly invisible, or would have if the technology hadn't been developed by the lowest bidding contractor for the Academy's perpetually underfunded xenobiology department. "I can see you, you know," called a voice that registered as casually amused on Zx'r's translator. "Your cloaking device is making the pine needles behind you bend the wrong way. Neat tech, though." Zx'r deactivated the camouflage with a resigned gesture that translated universally as equipment failure at the worst possible moment. The human stood approximately 10 meters away, carrying what appeared to be primitive survival equipment strapped to its back. "Readings, Earth inhabitant," Zx'r began, its translator working overtime to convert its natural high-pitched vibrations into human speech patterns. "I am conducting non-invasive observational research. Your planet's classification status requires verification, and I assure you my presence poses no threat." The human adjusted the straps on its shoulders and grinned. Zx'r's xenobiology database helpfully indicated this facial expression could signify either friendliness or imminent predatory behavior. "So, you're basically a space zoologist here to figure out if we're dangerous or not." The human seemed more entertained than alarmed by the concept of being classified by extraterrestrial bureaucracy. "I'm guessing your bosses are confused about something." "Confusion would imply uncertainty," Zx'r replied with what passed for dignity in academic circles. "The Academy merely requires verification of certain statistical anomalies regarding your species' survival capabilities. Your evolutionary profile suggests you should not be able to thrive in your planet's conditions, yet you do so with remarkable success." The human laughed. Zx'r's translator indicated this was not a threat display, but likely a sign of amusement. "Wait until you see what we do for fun," the human said, approaching with an extended upper limb. "I'm a wilderness guide, was planning a solo trek through the backcountry, but I'd be happy to show an alien scientist around instead. Much more interesting than taking wealthy tourists who complain about the lack of wireless connectivity." Zx'r hesitated before extending one of its manipulator appendages. Physical contact with unclassified species was strictly against protocol, filed under ways to contract exotic diseases and/or lose appendages. The human clasped Zx'r's appendage briefly, a gesture the database identified as a handshake, despite no actual shaking occurring, and began unpacking various primitive tools from its carrying device. "I've mapped out a 3-day route that showcases some of the region's more interesting ecological zones. Hope your suit can handle a bit of climbing. There's a ridge about 12 miles from here with a view that'll either convince you we're worth preserving as a species or confirm whatever cosmic paperwork you need to file." Zx'r's internal recording devices captured everything, annotating the exchange with biochemical readings, behavioral markers, and footnotes for further analysis. The human displayed none of the fear responses typical of primitive species encountering advanced civilizations for the first time. Instead, it exhibited curiosity, adaptability, and a perplexing comfort with the unknown. "Your lack of alarm at my presence is noteworthy," Zx'r observed. "Most primitive species." "First, calling us primitive is a bit rich coming from someone whose cloaking technology can't account for pine needle refraction," the human interrupted, grinning again. "Second, you're about the 5th alien species I've run into in these mountains. The others were more secretive, but you all have the same, observing the wildlife vibe. I figure if you were going to invade, you'd have done it decades ago instead of creeping around our national parks taking notes." Zx'r's recording devices registered what could only be described as the xenobiological equivalent of a record scratch. "5th species. Our records indicate no official contact protocols have been." Yeah. I'm sure there's paperwork saying we're per contact, or whatever bureaucratic label keeps your administrators happy. Meanwhile, you folks keep showing up in our wilderness areas with your fancy tech and poor camping skills." The human finished assembling what appeared to be a primitive defense tool, but was apparently used for terrain navigation. "I'm guessing most humans who spot you either don't report it or get dismissed as conspiracy theorists." The human's casual revelation of multiple xenobiological research missions sent Zx'r's data analysis subroutines into overdrive. Either this human was experiencing perceptual delusions, or, more worryingly, the Academy's supposedly groundbreaking research mission was merely the latest in a series of poorly coordinated observation attempts. "Would you consent to being a research subject?" Zx'r asked, attempting to salvage some scientific value from the increasingly irregular first contact scenario. "Your knowledge of previous observation missions makes you an invaluable data point." The human shouldered its pack again. "Sure, as long as it doesn't involve probing. I'll even take you through some terrain that'll really confuse your classification systems. There's a reason we call these survival trips, after all." As they began hiking along a barely perceptible path through the dense forest, Zx'r's internal systems calculated a 78.3% probability that this expedition would result in a complete reevaluation of humanity's classification status. The remaining 21.7% covered various scenarios involving personal embarrassment, academic disgrace, and the statistically small but non-zero chance of becoming prey to one of Earth's many predatory species. The human moved with easy confidence through terrain that Zx'r's exosuit identified as hazardous at least 17 times in the first hour alone. Every step seemed to defy the classification data. Every casual remark about the environment's dangers contradicted the species, mostly harmless, designation. "Watch that ridgeline," the human pointed casually. "Mountain lions sometimes hunt along there. Beautiful creatures, but they've been known to stalk humans they think are vulnerable." "Your species considers apex predators beautiful?" Zx'r queried, tagging the statement for further analysis. "Of course," the human replied with a shrug. "Deadly things are often the most beautiful. That's kind of our whole relationship with nature. Respect the danger, appreciate the beauty, and always carry a good knife." Zx'r made an annotation that would eventually be highlighted, underlined, and circled in the final report. Classification update urgently required. Subject species appears to have evolved alongside their planet's predators, not merely as survivors, but as competitive apex predators themselves, with cultural admiration for lethal capability. The sun began to descend toward the jagged horizon as they established what the human called a campsite, but Zx'r mentally categorized as a temporary survival outpost in hostile territory. Tomorrow, the human promised, we'll venture into the real wilderness where things get interesting. Zx'r's exosuit detected 15 different ways their current location could already kill an unprepared visitor. Interesting was not the adjective the xenobiologist would have chosen for what was to come. Dawn broke over the mountain range with the subtlety of a malfunctioning jump drive, all brilliant flashes and sudden transitions that left Zx'r's optical receptors struggling to adjust. The human, meanwhile, emerged from its primitive sleep shelter looking inexplicably refreshed, despite having voluntarily lain unconscious on the actual ground for nearly 7 hours. "Sleep well?" the human asked, already busy with the ritual preparation of a bitter stimulant beverage that, according to Zx'r's chemical analysis, was approximately 2 molecules away from being classified as a controlled substance on 17 different worlds. "I do not require sleep as your species understands it," Zx'r replied, omitting the fact that it had spent the night cycle running urgent recalibrations on its threat assessment protocols. "My exosuit provides all necessary biological maintenance through periodic energy conservation modes." "So that's a no, then?" the human said, pouring the steaming liquid into a container that had seen better decades. "Sounds like you spent the night doing the alien equivalent of tossing and turning. Don't worry, where we're headed today will either fascinate you or terrify you so completely you'll forget about being tired." In what was becoming an alarmingly consistent pattern, the human's statement proved to be both accurate and an understatement of galactic proportions. Their path took them deeper into what the human called pristine wilderness, and what Zx'r's navigational systems labeled with increasingly urgent warnings about isolation from emergency extraction points. The terrain grew steeper, the vegetation denser, and the wildlife more prevalent. Zx'r's atmospheric sensors detected pheromone markers from at least 6 different predatory species, all of which had evolutionary features that would make a Drastian shock trooper request immediate retirement. "We're entering prime territory now," the human announced cheerfully, pausing to examine a series of gouges in a tree trunk. "Something big came through here recently. See these marks? Bear probably sharpening its claws." Zx'r's database helpfully provided images of the bear in question. A massive omnivore with strength sufficient to crush exosuits, temperament issues that would get it discharged from most military forces for excessive aggression, and a bite force that could reduce standard-issue armor to interesting abstract sculptures. "Your species ventures into territories containing such predators voluntarily." Zx'r managed to keep its voice modulation steady through sheer academic professionalism. "Of course," the human replied, its expression suggesting this was as logical as calculating orbital trajectories. "How else would you see them up close? Besides, bears usually avoid humans." Usually, the casual addition of that word triggered no fewer than 14 distinct alarm protocols in Zx'r's threat assessment matrix. By midday, they had ascended to a ridgeline overlooking a verdant valley bisected by a rushing river. The human stopped at a narrow passage between 2 towering rock formations, examining the ground with sudden intensity. "Interesting," the human murmured, crouching to touch something Zx'r couldn't see. "Very fresh sign." "Something big passed through here within the hour." "Sign?" Zx'r inquired, its translator struggling with the contextual meaning. "Tracks, scat, territorial markings." The human pointed to various disturbed areas on the ground that looked, to Zx'r's untrained perception, identical to every other patch of dirt they'd traversed. "This is a game trail. Animals use it regularly to access the water below." The human straightened, scanning the surrounding landscape with a focus that contrasted sharply with its previous casual demeanor. "We should be alert from here on. We're not the only ones using this path." Zx'r's exosuit automatically adjusted its defensive settings without conscious command, an autonomic response to detecting elevated stress hormones in its wearer. Perhaps we should select an alternative route. My research does not require confrontation with apex predators. The human laughed, but the sound carried a different quality than before, less amusement, more acknowledgement of shared understanding. Don't worry, I do this professionally. Besides, the real data you want isn't how humans avoid dangerous situations. It's how we handle them when they happen. They continued downward toward the valley floor, the passage narrowing further until rocky walls rose on either side, creating a natural funnel that Zx'r's tactical subroutines immediately flagged as exceptionally poor positioning with limited escape vectors. The human, however, moved with increasing caution rather than concern, each step deliberately placed, each pause filled with environmental assessment. "You're recording all this, right?" the human asked without turning around. This is the kind of situational awareness your classification protocols probably miss. Humans don't just blunder through dangerous environments. We read them. "My observational systems are functioning at optimal capacity," Zx'r confirmed, while privately acknowledging that the human's behavioral patterns had already invalidated 7 different academic theories about species-wide risk assessment capabilities. The narrow passage suddenly opened into a small clearing alongside the rushing river. The human stopped abruptly, raising one hand in a gesture that required no translation. Silence, stillness. "We're not alone," the human whispered, voice barely audible over the water's constant rhythm. Zx'r's sensors performed a rapid sweep, detecting a large heat signature partially concealed in the dense vegetation across the clearing. The readings aligned with the bear classification from the database, approximately 400 kg of muscle, claw, and fang, currently watching them with predatory intent. "Don't move," the human instructed, slowly shifting its pack off its shoulders. "It's a grizzly male, probably displaced from its usual territory by the wildfires last season." The massive predator emerged from the vegetation with deliberate slowness, its movements conveying a confidence born from being at the top of the evolutionary hierarchy. Its size exceeded Zx'r's database parameters by approximately 20%, suggesting this was an exceptional specimen even among its fearsome species. "When I say run, head back up the trail about 50 meters. There's a rock formation you can climb," the human said, voice still conversational despite the imminent threat. "But not yet. Running triggers chase instincts. Your species doesn't possess the physical capabilities to outpace such a predator," Zx'r observed, its voice modulation betraying its rising concern. "I don't need to outpace it," the human replied with unsettling calm. "I just need to convince it that I'm more trouble than I'm worth." The bear rose onto its hind legs, standing nearly 3 meters tall, and released a vocalization that caused Zx'r's audio receptors to automatically dampen to prevent damage. The display was clearly intended to intimidate, and by any rational standard of threat assessment, it succeeded brilliantly. The human, in defiance of logical survival protocols, spoke directly to the towering predator. "Hey there, big guy, you're looking healthy. Good salmon run this year." The casual tone contradicted every survival instinct evolution had ever conceived. "We're just passing through. No need for territorial displays." The bear dropped to all fours again, its massive head swinging side to side in what Zx'r's database identified as pre-aggressive assessment behavior. It took one deliberate step forward, then another, the distance between predator and potential prey shrinking with each massive paw print pressed into the earth. "All right, so that's how it's going to be," the human muttered, reaching slowly into a side pocket of its utility garment. "Plan B it is." "What is Plan B?" Zx'r managed to ask, already calculating the structural integrity of its exosuit against ursine dentition. "Depends on what happens next." The human withdrew a small canister from its pocket, eyes never leaving the approaching predator. "But I'm guessing it's going to involve making a lot of noise and possibly some physical exertion." The bear's next vocalization was lower, rumbling through the clearing like distant thunder, a sound that Zx'r's helpful database translated as imminent attack posturing. The massive creature lowered its head, powerful muscles bunching visibly beneath its thick fur. "Run now!" The human's voice held no room for debate, and Zx'r's self-preservation protocols finally overrode its scientific observation imperatives. As the xenobiologist retreated up the narrow path, Its rear sensors captured the beginning of what would become the most significant revision to humanity's classification status in galactic history. The human didn't flee. Instead, it planted its feet firmly, raised both arms to appear larger, and produced a vocalization that matched the bear's in volume, if not bass resonance. In one fluid motion, it activated the small canister, which released a cloud of irritant chemicals into the air between human and predator. The bear charged, covering the clearing in seconds, moving with a speed that defied its massive bulk. The human waited until the last possible moment before sidestepping, not quickly enough to avoid contact entirely, but sufficiently to convert a direct impact into a glancing collision that still sent the human tumbling across the rocky ground. Zx'r reached the designated rock formation, its climbing appendages finding purchase on the rough surface as it ascended to a safer vantage point. From this elevated position, its observational equipment continued recording what conventional xenobiological wisdom insisted should be the final moments of the human's existence. The bear recovered from its initial charge and circled back, blood visible on its face, where the chemical irritant had found its mark. The human was already on its feet, bleeding from several lacerations but showing no signs of retreat. Instead, it had drawn a primitive edged tool, laughably inadequate against such a predator in Zx'r's academic assessment. "Come on, then," the human called out, its voice registering a complex mixture of adrenaline, focus, and something Zx'r's translator couldn't quite capture, something that might in other contexts be identified as exhilaration. "Let's settle this properly." As sun and shadow played across the clearing, predator and prey, though which was which had suddenly become less clear, began what Zx'r's report would later describe as a confrontation that fundamentally challenges established hierarchies of evolutionary dominance theory. The bear charged again, and with it, any remaining certainty about humanity's classification in the galactic order was about to be torn apart as thoroughly as the human should have been. Most xenobiological textbooks contain a glaring omission. What happens when a mostly harmless species faces an apex predator 4 times its mass? This oversight was about to be corrected in spectacular fashion. From its rocky perch, Zx'r recorded with horrified fascination as the bear charged again. The human, rather than accepting death with dignity, pivoted with unexpected agility, driving its pathetically small blade into the creature's shoulder. The weapon, previously catalogued by Zx'r as primarily ceremonial, sliced through fur and muscle, drawing first blood. "That got your attention, didn't it?" the human called out, voice carrying challenge rather than terror. "Come on now, we're both bleeding." The bear rounded with a roar that vibrated Zx'r's exosuit. It stood upright, reaching its full intimidating height with claws extended. The human, in what would become the most analyzed footage in Academy history, charged directly toward the bear. The bear hesitated, just long enough for the human to dive beneath its reach, roll through dirt and stone, and leap onto its back, one arm wrapped around the thick neck while the other drove the blade repeatedly into the juncture where skull met spine. The bear's roar transformed into something higher-pitched, the sound of an apex predator realizing it had catastrophically miscalculated. "Just go down already," the human shouted. "I don't want to kill you if I don't have to." Zx'r's translator flagged this statement with multiple errors, offering mercy to an apex predator mid-combat registered as untranslatable concept contradiction in 3 classification systems. The bear threw the human off, but the smaller creature immediately sprang back to its feet. Blood streamed from multiple lacerations, yet its breathing registered as labored but controlled. The human shifted its blade to its non-dominant hand while retrieving a telescoping impact weapon with the other. "One last chance to walk away," the human called out. The bear declined this diplomatic overture. At impact, the human dropped to one knee, using the bear's momentum against it, and drove upward with both weapons, blade seeking throat, impact weapon targeting the sensitive nasal structure. Both found their marks with precision, suggesting this was not the human's first melee combat. What followed defied analysis. The human pursued the retreating bear, preventing escape, forcing confrontation on increasingly favorable terms. Each time the bear disengaged, the human pressed the attack, targeting the same wounds with systematic efficiency. The bear made one final lunge, The human staggered but drove the blade upward into the throat with such force that the weapon disappeared to the hilt. Blood poured as the human maintained its grip, using it as leverage while striking the creature's face and eyes until the massive body finally went still. "Damn it," the human muttered, regret rather than triumph in its voice. "I really didn't want to kill you." Later, as they prepared to leave, Zx'r finally found words. "Your species classification requires immediate revision. The designation, mostly harmless, is catastrophically inaccurate." The human laughed. "Oh, that's not even the impressive stuff. Wait until you see what we can do with actual weapons and tactical planning. This was just improvisation." Zx'r composed preliminary notes for what would become the most significant taxonomic revision in galactic history. Deathworlders Class 1. Extreme caution advised. Apex predator status confirmed. "So," the human asked conversationally, "did you get good data for your research?" Zx'r could only respond with profound understatement. "The data collected will prove analytically significant." The Galactic Classification Authority's emergency session was convened with the bureaucratic equivalent of warp speed, which is to say, merely weeks rather than decades after receiving Zx'r's report. Representatives from 17 major spacefaring civilizations gathered in the Grand Assembly Hall, an architectural wonder specifically designed to accommodate species ranging from methane-breathing gas giants to silicon-based crystalline entities, all united by their shared interest in not being eaten by the universe's newest recognized apex predator. Zx'r's research footage played on the central holographic display for the 14th time. Several delegates had requested bio breaks during previous viewings, citing the need to engage their species' equivalent of stress vomiting. "Implications are concerning," intoned High Classifier Vexnault of the Proximal Conclave, all 7 of their eye stalks drooping in distress. "If one unarmed human can dispatch an apex predator of that size, what might they accomplish with actual weapons or, worse, coordination?" added Ambassador Creel from the Draconian Empire, a civilization that prided itself on military prowess until approximately 42 minutes ago when they'd first viewed the footage. "There are 8 billion of them." A collective shudder rippled through the assembly hall. The analysis committee chair activated their communication node. "We've completed review of Zx'r's complete data package. The human not only terminated the predator but expressed regret afterward. This suggests a complex relationship with violence. They're capable of exceptional brutality but employ it selectively." "How reassuring," muttered a representative from the Altarian cluster. "They feel bad about dismembering other species. We should all sleep better knowing that." Zx'r, elevated to the status of leading xenobiologist following its groundbreaking research, interfaced with the central communication system. "If I may offer additional context, the human's combat capabilities, while impressive, are not the most disturbing aspect of my findings." The assembly hall fell silent, a feat previously achieved only during budget discussions. "The most concerning element is their casualness about these capabilities. The human treated the encounter as routine. When I inquired about previous such confrontations, it replied, and I quote, 'Not my first bear.' This suggests a species that has evolved alongside predators, not as prey, but as competitive apex predators themselves." High Classifier Vexnault's eye stalks quivered. "And they've developed advanced technology despite this evolutionary background. Most species either develop intelligence as a prey adaptation or aggression as a predator adaptation, rarely both." "Precisely," Zx'r confirmed. "Furthermore, my subject mentioned this was improvisation, and that their capabilities with actual weapons and tactical planning were far superior." The Altarian representative activated the emergency hydration system at their station. "So, they're apex predators who regret killing, possess advanced technology, and consider hand-to-hand combat with megafauna to be improvisation. Wonderful. The classification must be adjusted immediately," declared the assembly chair. "I propose Deathworlders Class 1, with the subcategory, approach with extreme caution." "With respect, Chair," Zx'r interjected, "I believe such classification is insufficient. My observations suggest an additional notation is required. Paradoxical Threat Assessment, violence capable but conditionally restrained." "Meaning what exactly?" demanded the Draconian representative. "Meaning," Zx'r explained with the patience of an academic addressing particularly dense undergraduates. That humans appear to possess the capability for extraordinary violence, coupled with the restraint to employ it selectively. This makes them more, not less, dangerous. Meanwhile, oblivious to their species' ongoing reclassification, the Human Expedition Guide had returned to regular work. Currently, it was leading a group of its own kind through the same wilderness area, explaining the intricacies of surviving in an environment that should, by all reasonable evolutionary standards, have eliminated their species millennia ago. "And here's where I had that bear encounter last month," the human explained, gesturing toward the now infamous clearing. "Remember, if you ever face a similar situation, bear spray is your first option. Physical confrontation is an absolute last resort." The other humans nodded seriously, making notes on primitive recording devices while standing casually in terrain that would qualify as a maximum security prison on most civilized worlds. "Any questions before we move on to the section about edible versus poisonous plants?" the human asked, as though surviving toxic flora were a charming afterthought to battling megafauna. Back in the assembly hall, the classification debate had reached its inevitable conclusion. Humans were officially redesignated as Deathworlders Class 1, with the special notation, Paradoxical Threat Assessment, and the critical advisory, Do Not Provoke. "What are the diplomatic implications?" asked a representative from the Centaurian Alliance. "Should first contact protocols be revised?" The diplomatic corps liaison activated their communication node. "We've already implemented new guidelines. All contact teams must include at least one combat specialist and one psychiatric evaluator. We've also forbidden use of the term primitive in reference to human technology, as it appears to irritate them." "Is there any good news?" the assembly chair inquired wearily. Zx'r interfaced once more. "Yes, actually, my research indicates humans are generally amenable to peaceful interaction and even respond favorably to scientific curiosity. They simply expect honesty." "Honesty?" repeated Vexnault. "About what?" "Everything," Zx'r replied. "My subject was aware of previous observation missions. It seems many humans have encountered our researchers and simply chosen not to report these encounters to their authorities." A stunned silence fell over the assembly. "You mean they ******* we were watching them?" the draconian representative finally asked. "Apparently so," Zx'r confirmed, and found it more amusing than concerning. The assembly chair's communication node flickered with the digital equivalent of a sigh. "So our new apex predator neighbors have been aware of our surveillance for decades, possess technology advanced enough for interstellar detection, can dismantle predators with their bare hands, and their response was essentially to let us continue our research without interruption." "Correct." Zx'r confirmed. "This is the worst-case scenario," muttered the Altarian representative. "How is that possibly the worst case?" demanded Vexnault. "Because," the Altarian explained with the weariness of someone who'd spent too long studying evolutionary game theory, "it means they're not just physically dangerous. They're ****confident***, species that allow potential threats to observe them do so only when they're certain of their superior position." Back on Earth, the human guide glanced briefly skyward, a small smile playing at the corners of its mouth as it spotted the faint distortion of a poorly calibrated cloaking device above the tree line. Another observation ship, this one larger than the previous ones. Word was spreading, apparently. "And that, folks," the human said to its companions while gesturing vaguely upward, "is why you should always look at the entire landscape, not just what's directly in front of you. You never know what you might spot if you pay attention." In the Galactic Classification Authority's newly formed Human Monitoring Division, alarms began blaring as multiple observation vessels reported the same disturbing development. The humans were waving at them.